There's a story going around the internet at the moment, British cyberspace, let's just say, that's generating a bit of discussion, debate. That's one of these things I think where context matters, where there's different angles to look at and so on. No doubt it will generate a lot more debate, and no doubt there'll be more angles to what I'm saying here. But I think it's worth talking about a little bit. So, Keir Starmer was visiting Bath and he went to a pub called the Raven. Basically, the pub landlord doesn't like Keir Starmer, and he quite energetically told the Labour leader to leave. Um, but what was caught on camera was quite dramatic. The landlord, a guy called Rod Humpreys, was clearly quite worked up, quite angry. He was saying that man cannot come in my pub. One of Starmer's security detail guys physically held him back. Now, this was within the pub, so there will be people looking at that and saying that's outrageous that a landlord is kept back in his own pub. I look at it from another angle. I do look at the security perspective. The fact of the matter is there has been violence against politicians in this country in recent years. Off the top of my head, I can think of Nigel Farage. I can think of Stephen Timms, a Labour MP. Joe Cox, obviously, is the infamous example, going a little bit further back, 20 years ago now. John Prescott, when he was infamously attacked by that Welsh farmer and defended himself. Um, and there's obviously a lot of politicians get heckled as well. The thing is, in a country like the UK, and this is true of France and other democracies as well, American town hall meetings are notoriously fiery. Um, I think an understated value is having tough skin. If you're a politician, even a councillor, whether it be MP level or councillor, or certainly if you're a prominent politician, um, you need tough skin. I think it comes with the territory because you're going to be relentlessly criticised by the media, various media outlets, political rivals, of course, but particularly the public. Now, when I read about this, I kind of gave the guy the benefit of the doubt. I thought, well, this has been a very hard time for that industry, for pubs. Maybe he was just feeling the pressure, and there's a lot of business uncertainty with that. So I am sympathetic to that, and I have no right to judge his feeling strongly about that. But I do think that optics matter, and there will be a contingent of people, probably the majority, that will try to portray this guy as a hero because he said some populist things. His issue, apparently, he was interviewed afterwards. He calmed down a good bit, and he said that he was angry with Starmer because, as he saw it, Starmer wasn't challenging the government on lockdown. He said he was a former Labour voter, and the impression I get is he wanted Starmer to be tougher on the government. But I think when it comes to COVID, which is the biggest issue of the day, um, Starmer does have to really get a balancing act. If he is too critical and cynical of the government, if he just criticises all the time, and we've seen this, Labour called for an independent inquiry into this, and the accusations then was, oh, well, Labour's just being opportunistic. They're not helping, they're just criticising. But surely the job of an opposition is to hold the government to account. So there's that side, but then there's the other side, which is if Starmer tries to be fair and be supportive where he agrees with the government, then Labour people will say he's no different. He's just um, he's being too passive. So I do think it's a real balancing act because Starmer has to challenge the government but not look opportunistic in doing so, and that's not an easy thing. People talk about how hard it is to be prime minister, and it is, but it's also very challenging being an opposition leader because you need to get the right balance. No, I'm not saying this to defend Starmer. There is a lot of things about his leadership I don't like. There's times I think he's too much of a lawyer and not enough of a politician. What I mean by that is sometimes I think he's a bit he's a bit of a suit. He's a bit dull, and there is a bit of an image problem there because He's clearly an intelligent man. He clearly knows his stuff, but sometimes that isn't entirely a vote winner. Maybe, dare I say it, Starmer needs to be a little bit more populist. Maybe just a little bit more of that sort of figure. And it probably shouldn't be that way, but the problem is someone who looks and sounds like a lawyer, and of course Starmer has a legal background, it's it doesn't really resonate with the public. There's a distance there. Um, but like I said, it's a balancing act. Anyway, on the more broader issue of how politicians interact with the public, the guy said that he didn't want that man in his pub. Well, what I was looking at is thinking, well, does that extend to all Labour voters? Because people aren't going to think, oh, well, this guy's a former Labour voter because of the interview afterwards, which I'll post. A lot of people look at that and say, well, he's just being partisan. He doesn't like Labour. So then people who might vote Labour would say, well, am I welcome in his pub? If you're running a public house, you can't really discriminate against who comes in based on their politics. I guess there's an exception if it's a public figure and you don't like the politics. And I'm not questioning his legal right to refuse Starmer service, but I think it's bad for business. If you're running a public house, I think you need to be prepared to serve anyone unless they're causing trouble, like they are, getting into a fight or selling drugs or something. Um, to me, it's bad optics and it's bad business because it polarizes people who might like and support Starmer as potential customers. I don't know. I would have thought it's bad for business, but I'm not a businessman. I could be wrong. Um, anyway, I'll round this up soon. But regarding the security issue, this is important. There will be those who say that it was the security guy was being excessive or something. I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think if the landlord had been a little bit calmer, a little bit more rational, there wouldn't have been need for that. You can't expect Starmer and his security detail to just second guess and say, oh, well, he just wants to passionately share his views. If you're ranting and raving and acting erratically, then common sense dictates that you might be a security threat. What's to say that he wouldn't have tried to take a swing at Starmer, or even worse? It's unlikely, but it has happened in this country. So security personnel are trained to deal with risk assessment and to deal with situations where there could be a risk. I wouldn't criticize that security guy because he was only doing his job. Um, and I think if the landlord had been a bit calmer, then that wouldn't have been necessary. I mean, he's every right to say to Starmer, "I don't want to serve you because I don't like your leadership." That would be totally within his right. I think it's a little bit bad for business, but it would be within his right. The issue here is the way he was behaving, so erratically and ranting and raving. It's human. I mean, God knows there's times I've wanted to do that to politicians, public figures. If I did, then I would be the landlord. Then the optics would be bad on me. So it's just something to think about because there will be people who hate lockdown and they hate the restrictions. The guy was citing Sweden and some American states. Well, actually, the evidence in Sweden is not conclusive. The Swedish model hasn't been a resounding success regarding its lockdown approach, so far as there's barely been one. Actually, this idea, because I remember people were praising the Swedish model as, oh, they haven't had lockdown in the very few cases. Actually, proportionally, they've had quite a lot. Not as much as this country, but they're by no means really, really successful. Um, to me, that was a little bit of Nordic, oh, we'll do it differently. And I'm not convinced it has been a success from what I've seen. Anyway, that's it. Let me know your thoughts. If you live in Bath, maybe you know this pub. I mean, are they welcoming to everyone? Are they partisan? Because that's the thing that people will think now. He's got 15 minutes of fame, and I know that sounds cynical. Maybe he was genuinely angry in the interview. He did sound like he was trying to catch his breath. Like when you've been really angry. I've been there. I know what it's like. I'm not entirely critical of the guy. Maybe he is just speaking from a point of frustration. It's his frustration, but I just think people need to be aware of how it looks. And you can't complain about if you're trying to remonstrate with a public figure and you're doing it in that way, and the public figure's security detail then restrains you, holds you back, you can't really complain. Um, it's a bit like that incident in Mansion House a few years ago when the Tory MP kind of tackled the woman protester. But again, if you're going to protest in a certain way, you can't expect others to know if you're a security risk or not. I don't think it's unreasonable for security personnel to do their job. I saw a video. Again, this is regardless of political ideology. I saw a video where this guy was trying to get into a private function with David Cameron, and he was making a big issue of the fact he wasn't allowed. Well, of course not. They don't know who you are. In fact, on this point of security, I watched the episode of The Queen. That's not The Queen, The Crown last night called Fagin, about the famous, infamous palace intruder Michael Fagan. Very gripping episode. I won't say much. I know an extra actually in that episode, a guy who appeared very briefly in the job scene. But if you know The Crown, superb episode, superb suspense. Anyway, in a democracy, politicians need tough skin. They need to be able to get criticism. But I also think, as members of the public, we have a responsibility to act in a rational way. Everyone does. Let me know your thoughts.